And, I mean, people know your bio, so I won't get into it. Freedom Watch on Fox as well. So much is going on. I want to move quick here with you today. Last week, you openly said that he could be indicted for this. It surprised me. Even some of the MSNBC hosts, like Mr. Schultz, said that the White House is in deep trouble. Congress is subpoenaing AIG. Now we learned that they tucked into a bill, as you know, that much of this is secret till 2018, which, again, shows evidence of the attempted cover-up. You have Geithner and others trying to cover up the fact that they transferred money to themselves and, of course, to former Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. This is huge.
You know, we don't exactly know what Geithner himself personally knew, but there's a couple of things that we do know, and I have read the emails that were released by Congressman Darrell Issa, who obtained them in his capacity as an American under the Freedom of Information Act. He didn't use any particular government authority to get them. And the emails are between and among lawyers for the New York Fed, lawyers for the Treasury Department, lawyers for AIG, and lawyers for J.P. Morgan Chase, which was the intermediary bank that the Fed was using through which to funnel its money. And basically, it is an instruction from the government to AIG, which was about to receive $185 billion, some from the government and some from the Federal Reserve, the largest single bailout in the history of by a government in the history of the world. And it was an instruction to AIG that in its applications for this money, it not list truthfully the identity of all of its creditors, and it especially not list its intention to pay some of those creditors 100 cents on the dollar. We now know that the principal creditor that the Fed lawyers wanted to keep from public awareness was Goldman Sachs. And, of course, at the time, the Treasury Secretary, Henry Paulson, was the recently retired chair of Goldman Sachs. We know now that AIG owed Goldman Sachs $13 billion, that it planned to pay 100 cents on the dollar, and that, in fact, it did. So, question. What did Tim Geithner know, and when did he know it? Well, he was the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York at the time. His in-house lawyers were telling AIG to hide from the SEC the existence of the debt to Goldman Sachs. Now, a little bit of basic law. You go to buy a $100 savings bond and you give the wrong zip code, no problem. But if you intentionally give the wrong address, you falsified a federal document and you can be prosecuted. Can you imagine what the law would say about falsifying a document not for a $100 savings bond, but for a $185 billion bailout of taxpayer dollars? That is what is confronting Tim Geithner.
Now, clearly he's the head of the New York Fed at the time, working with his former boss, the former head of Goldman Sachs, who was the Treasury Secretary in the fall of and winter of 2008, Henry Paulson. And we have Paulson, we have Geithner, we have Bernanke, all in countless House and Senate Banking Committee meetings, repeating what's in the emails, saying, we won't tell you who got the money. We won't tell you, telling Congress, who under the Constitution, as you know, but for some of the audience, has full control over the issuance of currency and credit and the banks. And so for him to now say, oh, as the head of the Fed, I had no idea what was going on with a $185 billion payout to my own former company and to the current Treasury Secretary of 2008. I mean, this is asinine. Clearly, their policy is to keep this secret. And so if we get subpoenas or get those documents, we have the SEC issuing its own ruling, as you know, saying it's secret until 2018. Under the bailout provision, they supposedly have this unconstitutional power. So we have this giant fraud and criminality going on in plain view. But it's kind of like saying, can Napoleon, can Hitler, can King George III do wrong? Or is this the divine right of kings, the new kings, the private bankers?
Well, we have almost created a princedom in the White House, obviously not starting with Barack Obama, starting with Abraham Lincoln, in which presidents just took on the law themselves and enacted taxes and imposed burdens and made decisions and slaughtered innocents to their own liking, and it's gotten worse and worse since then, usually during time of war.
And now they just openly steal trillions in front of everyone. I mean, what's next? Barbecuing children on the White House lawn?
Well, I don't know what will be next, but this particular president, much like his immediate predecessor, seems to recognize no natural law, American value, or constitutional restraint on anything he wants to do. Now, the time period that we are discussing, in which Geithner's lawyers at the Fed told the lawyers for or the New York Fed told the lawyers for AIG, don't tell anybody you're going to pay $13 billion to Goldman Sachs. The president was George W. Bush. I can't imagine, with his lack of intellectual curiosity, that he personally knew about this, but this happened in his administration. So Hank Paulson is someone that the government can also look at. But you put your finger on a very interesting point. When the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Alex, says that this is secret until 2016, guess whose regulations were violated by the knowing and intentional decision not to list not to list Goldman Sachs as a creditor of AIG?
SEC.
Exactly. Now, when you break the law, telling a judge or jury the government told me to do it is not a defense. In fact, most judges wouldn't even let you articulate that in the courtroom. But that is literally what happened here. We have the apparent makings of a grand conspiracy in which government officials counseled the recipients of government largesse to lie about the nature and extent of the largesse and what was going to be done with it.
Now, Judge, isn't it an oxymoron to have Geithner and the rest of the crew who are in this revolving door sharing powers with each other in the private corporate banks and then in government, clearly stating our official policy is who gets these trillions of dollars that have been served out, 180 plus billion to themselves. Their official policy before Congress in the last 2 years is that it's all secret, and then now they say, oh my goodness, this is terrible, we don't know who did this, we're not involved in these emails, making it secret. I mean, that right there, when they have articulated that their policy is to make it secret, and then to now say that I mean, it just insults rational thought. Clearly, they're engaged in a cover-up, and the SEC is clearly involved. I mean, here's Kurt Nemo's Infowars.com headline from yesterday. SEC engages in conspiracy with AIG to hide bailout evidence. We've got a top judge here saying that that's exactly what he thinks is going on. Where do we go from here where they're just, I mean, the emperor has no clothes. This is a joke.
Well, we go to places like your show, because of your zeal and your courage and your fearlessness in exposing this, much as you exercised the same zeal and courage and fearlessness in the previous administration. And we have to educate people. But, Alex, I feel it resonating now. When Bush was doing these things, I frequently felt that my words and sometimes yours were falling on deaf ears, other than those who, before all this happened, had an appreciation for human liberty and limited government and the primacy of the individual. But I see that as a prairie fire spreading around the country now. I mean, just think of it. The Democrats in Massachusetts are within a weekend of losing a seat that they claimed was the personal property of the Kennedy family to a Republican. He's not your kind of Republican or my kind of Republican.
But there's a mass exodus. The Democratic Party is imploding because Bush, we thought Bush was bad because he tripled government. Obama, as you know, officially spent more money than all presidents before him combined back to George Washington.
And he hasn't even been in office a year. You're right. And I think that the Democrats know that they will soon lose their filibuster-proof Senate, and they may actually lose the House altogether in November. So they know that if they want to do what FDR did to us in 12 years, they only have 10 months left in which to do it. And the next 10 months will be a mad dash to see how much unconstitutional legislation that regulates private human behavior they can weave into federal law. But they are beginning to feel the blowback already. Prediction: If this young man, moderate Republican that he is, wins and gets Ted Kennedy's seat, you will begin to see moderate Democrats, the so-called blue dog Democrats, even a couple of them in the Senate that voted for the monstrous health care bill, begin to defect because they will fear for their own jobs. And
well, they're already starting to jump ship.